talk to me about, first of all, your work when you were in the police. What was that like? Because you were a detective, which is quite a high...
Yeah, I loved my job. I mean, people who don't know my story, and anybody who wants to can read about my secrets in my book. But I joined the police when I was 41. You know, I was a bit long in the tooth. I'd got 4 kids. I was married. And for my sins, I joined the police to make a difference. I was posted to Moss Side, which was a complete shock to I was seen as a middle-class woman. I'd lived in a nice house, not really come into contact with crime. And suddenly I'm like running around and dealing with gangs and drugs, and I was in major crime. I didn't go into child protection, but I loved my job, and I became a family liaison officer. I worked on kidnappings, I worked on gang-related murders, I went to Jamaica on another murder. You know, I had a fantastic career, and I was good at what I did. Don't put me on CCTV and don't put me on telephones, but you give me a vulnerable person, you give me an ordinary person or a child who had been abused or a woman who'd been subjected to domestic violence. You know, I understood people and I wanted to do the right thing. I was always honest. And then in 2004, my husband was terminally ill and I was asked to go on a job called Operation Augusta. That was my first introduction to grooming gangs and what I've become known for. But I've had a really full life that, I want women to know that there are lots of different chapters to their life, but my career was central. My kids are the most important part. What I saw on Operation Augusta, though, was dozens and dozens of very vulnerable children being raped, not groomed, raped on a daily basis by gangs of very sophisticated paedophiles. Greater Manchester Police, I worked for GMP, and we had a database with over 100 men on that database that we knew were abusing those children. We had professionals, social workers, who had been crying out for the police to do something for years. I worked on that job for well over a year, and then my husband was terminally ill. I went off work to look after him in his last couple of months. When I came back to work, that job had been buried. Not one man was prosecuted for rape. The children had been left high and dry, and those men free to abuse generations of other children. I'm skipping through this very quickly. But in 2020, after I had repeatedly gone on about this gross criminal neglect, Andy Burnham put together an independent review. That review reported that GMP officially closed that investigation down because
GMP,
Greater Manchester Police, because they wouldn't put resources in. They've now been forced to reopen that. I saw the same failures, though, in 2010 and 11 with Operation Span in Rochdale, and we have just had the new Chief Constable admit to organisational incompetence in dealing with the way those children were again failed. So seeing that and knowing what was going on, I was faced really with 2 choices. Either stay in my job and remain silent. I spent 18 months within the job trying to be heard, going from, head of public protection, chief constable, home office. Nobody wanted to hear. I was threatened with prison. But I felt that I had to stand up for what I believed in. And for me, the most important job that police officers do is protect the vulnerable. And here we had a cover-up on a monumental basis. I didn't know at the beginning, Nana, that this was going on all through the country. I was so naive that I thought it was perhaps one lazy officer. I know very different now. And our work in the Maggie Oliver Foundation shows me that this is still going on today. The authorities are still not dealing with it properly. It is no longer just grooming gang victims that are being failed, though, because we are dealing with victims of sexual abuse that are not victims of grooming gangs. And, you know, I've seen an article today that says that more than a third of police officers have got less than 5 years service, and we've got a crisis in policing. We've got a criminal justice system that has fallen apart. We've got delays in getting to court for the most vulnerable victims of up to 5 years. And so this kind of issue has followed me through my life. And now I've got a real great team alongside me, but we've got an awful lot of work to do.
So Maggie, how did you blow the whistle then on it? What did you do?
What happened was I went into work, and anybody who's watched Three Girls, I was the programme consultant on that. And the two of the girls represented in there, Amber and Ruby, were my girls. And I spent months gaining their trust and getting them to spend hours and hours giving video interviews, going to ID parades, on the absolute guarantee that their abusers would be taken to court. They were willing to go to court. On a Friday afternoon, I turned up at work to be told that they were no longer going to use Amber. Instead, they chose to put her on the indictment as one of the gang of paedophiles. She had been abused from the age of 15. She'd never been arrested, never been cautioned, had no legal advice, and they did that secretly in a way, the only way to get her evidence into court, because they had dropped her as a victim. We also had young Ruby, who had been made pregnant at 12. Police had illegally, in my opinion, seized the fetus, locked it away in a freezer, where it remained for 2 years. When I was taken onto that job, I was asked if I would tell the family that we had it, get their consent to use it to get DNA, and then we could prosecute the man who got her pregnant for rape. I saw her abuser charged with sexual activity with a child by the Crown prosecutor made that decision. The man who got her pregnant was out of prison in less than 4 years. He wasn't charged with rape. He is now walking around the streets of Rochdale. So those things to me are not justice. Amber had been demonised by the court as a tactic, and I quote, a tactical option. It almost destroyed her life. And I felt guilty and responsible, even though actually I had nothing to be guilty for, because I had done what I was asked to do by the Chief Constable, by senior police officers, because this was the biggest case that Greater Manchester Police were dealing with. And I spent months at home going from pillar to post, because I couldn't make any sense of it, Nana. What I was seeing was not justice. It was not what I joined the police to do. And ultimately, when every door was slammed in my face, I had two choices. You know, either stay in your job, get your wage, go home and turn a blind eye, or resign and go public. Now, when I said that I was not going to be silenced, I wanted this dealing with, and if the police were not going to deal with it, then I was going to go public. I truly feared I would go to prison. It made me so ill. I ended up my last day at work unconscious on the floor. I lost my home, I lost my career, I lost my income. I actually almost lost my mental health, and I had the Chief Constable responding to I did file on 4, where the victims spoke out, I spoke out, and I had the Chief Constable going on national TV and on in the national media saying that I was this woman who was, I'd been bereaved because my husband had died. I'd kind of lost the plot because of that. I became too emotionally involved, but something inside me would not let this go. And I always say that I was watching on the TV all the Hillsborough families who had fought for 30 years to have the truth told. And I knew that I didn't want my children to turn the TV on in 30 years' time and see Operation Span, the Rochdale grooming case, and say, well, my mum worked on that. Why did she not say anything? So I made the impossible decision to resign.